Going into a film expecting very little is often the best policy in my view. Given how disappointing The Last Jedi was, and all of the problems that Solo, a Star Wars story, had from a production standpoint, I honestly expected this to be a train wreck of a movie, but it wasn't. It wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as many people thought it was going to be. Ron Howard was brought in during production to replace directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller after they left because of creative differences. It was later said that they were fired because the production team were unhappy with their shooting style. The editor, Chris Dickens, was replaced by Pietro Scalia, and Howard had to reshoot 70% of this film after he came on board. I expected the movie to be a mess, and in parts, yes, it really was, but generally speaking, it's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. The first hour is decent, the last 30 minutes make for a solid conclusion. It's the middle 45 minutes or so that are fairly lackluster to the point of being boring and disjointed. The film tells the story of a young Han Solo trying to escape a criminal gang with his girlfriend Kira on the planet Corellia. He manages to flee the planet, but she gets captured. He signs up to the Imperial Navy to become a pilot so that he can one day get a ship and come back to rescue her. When he signs on, Han doesn't give a second name. As he enlists by himself, the Imperial officer gives him the second name Solo. Several years go by and Han is now fighting as an infantryman. He encounters a group of criminals masquerading as Imperial officers, led by Tobias Beckett, played by Woody Harrelson. They're doing a job for the crime syndicate Crimson Dawn. Their job is to steal a shipment of coaxium, which is a highly explosive hyperspace fuel. Initially, Han is imprisoned and left to be eaten by a Wookiee, which is obviously the introduction of Chewbacca. Han convinces Chewie to work with him to escape, and before long, Beckett, who's impressed by their resourcefulness, recruits them to work with his gang of thieves. The train job on the planet Vandor goes south when they're intercepted by Cloud Riders. The coaxium is destroyed and 2 of the crew are killed. They attempt to make it up to the Crimson Dawn crime leader Voss on his ship, and it's there that Han unexpectedly runs into Kira, who left Corellia some time ago, though how she left and what she had to do in order to leave remains a mystery. She's tied to Voss now and appears to be a member of Crimson Dawn. This doesn't stop a love-struck Han from attempting to win back her affections, but Beckett tells him to trust no one. The plan is to make things up with Voss and capture some coaxium on the planet Kessel. If they fail, Voss will kill them all. Kira goes with them and leads them to Lando Calrissian. After losing a game of sabacc in which the wager was Lando's ship to help them complete their mission, Han is disgruntled, but Beckett talks Lando into lending them his ship in exchange for a share in the profits of the heist. They proceed to fly Lando's Millennium Falcon to Kessel. Long story short, they manage to get the coaxium, but not without Lando's love interest, an obnoxious character, a droid named L337. She's killed after she instigates a slave revolt. Lando's romantic interest in this droid is just weird. I can't tell if it's played for awkward laughs sometimes, but when she dies and he's mourning over her, it's just really odd. When he runs back to retrieve her remains and she falls apart, I actually laughed out loud in the cinema. I'm fairly certain this wasn't meant to be funny. People were complaining that Calrissian is pansexual in this film because he's sexually attracted to a bipedal machine that bears no resemblance to a humanoid of any kind. I mean, what were the writers thinking here? This is one of the strangest decisions for a character I've ever seen in a film. It's impossible for the audience to feel anything with respect to Lando's feelings for L3, for 2 reasons. Firstly, because she's a horribly off-putting and self-righteous character with no redeeming qualities, and secondly, because she looks like a walking tin can. If she'd been an android that was physically indistinguishable from a human female, I would say something, but this is just ridiculous, and if anything, just weakens Lando's character by making him seem like a weirdo. Anyway, I'll skip past the requisite narrow escape sequence in space and proceed to the conclusion where they land on a planet where they'll process the coaxium and give it to Voss. There they encounter the Cloud Riders again. Turns out they're actually rebels. Their leader manages to convince Han to help them out, though Beckett isn't convinced. He eventually betrays them and sells them out to Voss. Han then reluctantly kills Beckett in order to hand the coaxium over to the rebels, and the film concludes with Han managing to beat Lando in a game of sabacc, having prevented Lando from cheating this time. In doing so, Han wins the Millennium Falcon and he and Chewie fly off for another adventure together. I actually kind of like how Kira's story arc was resolved. We really didn't need to know everything that had happened to her during those missing years. It's left to the imagination as to why she joined the Crimson Dawn and what she had to do in order to survive, and her selling out in the end and becoming the leader of the syndicate was a nice twist, and generally I liked Emilia Clarke's characterization, but the character herself is very underdeveloped, a little bit wooden, and her relationship with Han is just odd. The feminism is present in the writing of her character, as you might imagine. She's a little too perfect and seems ultra confident in every situation she finds herself in. What politically correct Hollywood writers don't understand is that this makes female characters bland, one-dimensional, and hard to relate to. Additionally, her joining the Crimson Dawn and unexpectedly showing up on Voss's ship later in the film is really done for one reason. Just like with Rey in The Force Awakens, a woman is not allowed to be rescued by a man anymore. Han was planning on getting a ship and going back to Corellia to rescue her, but the leftist feminist press, of course, would have complained that this was reinforcing the damsel in distress narrative or something, and women are not allowed to be damsels anymore. Men can be saved by women these days, but not the other way around. Women have to be strong, and men are all betas. Alden Ehrenreich's performance as Han Solo definitely polarizes a lot of fans. I think he did a reasonable job. My issue was the script he was given. I can appreciate he's playing a younger, more naive version of Han, but I don't really think we get an explanation for how he grew into becoming the scoundrel we knew and loved in the original movies. Throughout this film, he gets pushed around all too easily by Beckett, L3, or Voss. At no point does he appear to be a leading man's man. He may be the protagonist in this story, but he's not sufficiently heroic enough. He's just very beta. He spends a lot of the movie just kind of reacting to things going on around him and not really taking charge. To the audience, it's obvious that there's something going on with Kira, something questionable. Her darker motivations are telegraphed a million miles away. You can see it all coming. But Han is clueless to this. He still thinks they can run off into the sunset together and live happily ever after. This makes him seem frustratingly naive at times. The writers didn't even allow him to land the final killer blow against Voss. That's given to Kira, of course, because women are all glass ceiling smashing tough chicks who don't need no man. There are moments in his performance where you get some glimpses of expressions and mannerisms that were kind of reminiscent of Harrison Ford's version, but the charismatic essence of his character is missing. It's also too bad I spent most of the movie trying to forget Han's ultimate dreadful and unnecessary demise in The Force Awakens. I'm also not convinced that a story about trying to retrieve some hyperspace fuel for a glorified Bond villain was a sufficient premise to center the film around, especially when that villain is given so little screen time and isn't even fully developed. During the middle of the film, the plot seriously gets bogged down because the action feels very random and detached from the story. This is possibly a side effect of the film's production problems, leading to a kind of made-up-as-it-goes-along feel. At no point does this film leave third gear and actually offer any kind of wow factor, though it's entertaining enough, and I probably would watch it again if it was on TV sometime in the next few years. It's really nothing special. The film isn't doing great at the box office, apparently, and I've deliberately avoided reading reviews from fans and critics. Big Hollywood blockbusters have a habit of being far too long these days. About 20 minutes could have been shaved off this film without losing too much, and it probably would have been a tighter movie as a result. But I don't want to nitpick here. Given all of the behind-the-scenes issues this film faced, they actually somehow managed to put together a cohesive and fairly enjoyable movie that I believe is worth seeing, but not in the cinema. Wait till it's on television or on offer at the bottom of a DVD bargain bin in a second-hand shop.